Hello and welcome to the Representation Project's In Rape Campaign Expert Interview Series. I am so delighted to introduce to you today survivor rights attorney Jessica Pride. We're going to have a lively discussion. My name is Dr. Caroline Heldman. I'm the executive director of the Representation Project, and we are an organization that uses filmmaking, activism, research, and campaigns to push for gender justice. We are currently focused on raising awareness about rape myths and how these rape myths prevent survivors from getting justice. And so today's talk is going to be just hit the nail on the head in terms of survivor justice. I want to say this will be an interview that is centered around sexual violence, so a trigger or activation warning. This may be something you want to watch later, and you are free to do that. This will be recorded and posted. So let's jump right into this. I am honored to interview survivor rights activist and attorney Jessica Pride. She is the managing partner at the Pride Law Firm. She has dedicated the last 17 years of her legal career to the representation of victims of sexual assault, child sexual abuse, and catastrophic injuries. Ms. Pride has settled numerous high-profile confidential sexual assault cases and holds the record for the single largest plaintiff settlement against a school district in California for a child who was molested by her teacher. When she's not working to get survivors justice inside the courtroom, Ms. Pride is active in the sexual assault community and activism to bring survivors justice outside the courtroom. She served as the president of the board of her local rape crisis center, the Center for Community Solutions, for over 4 years. She also co-founded and chairs the sexual assault litigation group of the National Trial Lawyers Association, also the American Association for Justice that trains lawyers on how to provide trauma-informed care to survivors, which we'll be talking about today. Jessica speaks all over the country about how to help survivors get justice and to hold perpetrators accountable. After working with thousands of survivors, you heard that right, thousands of survivors, Ms. Pride decided to co-found Sirona Sexual Assault Healing Center. It provides trauma-informed healing resources that result in actual lasting healing for survivors. She is excited for Sirona to open its doors in August of 2024 in San Diego, something else we'll be talking about. From the moment Ms. Pride began her journey until now, she is determined to turn her trauma into triumph by helping change survivors' lives one person at a time. Welcome, Jessica.
Thank you so much, Caroline, for having me. I'm so excited to be here with you today. I'm so inspired by the work that you do and just really feel privileged to be here with you today.
Well, the feeling is mutual, and I have to say the number of times I've had survivors come to me and say, well, what do I do next? Or, sitting in a courtroom and watching defense attorneys just take survivors apart because they said the wrong thing to police, or maybe not the wrong thing, they just left out an important detail because they were in a moment of trauma. We will get into all of that. I think this is going to be a really useful, both kind of theoretical, systemic critique and also nuts and bolts. But let's start with getting a sense of you. Tell us about your decision to specialize in representing survivors of sexual assault in their quest to get justice. When and how did you know this was going to be your life path?
I think, like all amazing things in life, it found me, right? And when you're faced with that decision in life or whatever it is you believe in, spirits, or one day you look up and you go, this is what I'm meant to do. And there's nothing else that makes sense in my life but to do this. And it took all of my life's experiences, one from being a survivor myself, to realizing I had legal skills that could help survivors, and having my first legal case that helped a survivor, to working at the local rape crisis center, to having friends who were experiencing sexual violence and trying to help them. And it was this culminating moment was like, wait, I can use all my skills and all my life experiences to do this, to help survivors, to be that person I wish I would have had when I was hurt, to guide me and tell me what to do. Because anyone who's ever been sexually assaulted knows it's one of the most crippling experiences you could ever experience in your life. And when you're just trying to survive, to figure out, what do I do? What are my options? if you actually had someone who could say, hey, here, give me your hand, let me help you, let me tell you what you need to do, or that's just game changing, because then you don't have to worry about if you're getting it wrong. um, Let me worry about that, and
Mm,
you figure out how to heal. So that's why I'm here. I mean, it's me. It's who I am. So
that's a really great way of putting it. So essentially you are saving your younger self, right? You're you're in that position.
yeah, I always say I'm trying to turn my trauma into triumph and to help someone else. um, there's healing in that. There's healing for myself. There's healing for the community. And that's what I really love about the survivor community, is that everyone is so willing to help the other person, to say, what can I do to make your experience better than mine? How can we stop this? And so that's why I really enjoy speaking to people like you, or the amazing colleagues we have in this world, because that gives me hope that we can, as a community, help end sexual violence. It's there is hope out there.
Absolutely. So the Masterson sentencing was this morning, and you had Cosby survivors in the courtroom, and you had Weinstein survivors and survivors of other, perpetrators in the courtroom supporting the survivors of Danny Masterson, who got 30 years to life, which is really rare, right? It's rare that you get this sort of justice. This is the 1%ers. This is the 1% case. But you have witnessed as someone who is thick in it, you have witnessed our justice system fail survivors by and large. Can you tell us why rape isn't taken more seriously as a crime, and what have you witnessed about the justice system when it comes to survivors?
Now, I want to say that I don't know that it's not being taken more seriously by the justice system, in that, because I think there are some really amazing district attorneys out there who want to prosecute sex crimes, but it's the construct of the burden of proof is really what inhibits them from filing cases. And so, what most people don't realize is that the prosecution rate across the country, depending on where you're at, is between 2 to 5%. 2 to 5%. That means most perpetrators are never getting prosecuted and never spending a day behind bars. Most perpetrators are out there in the world. And so that is, I think, a large in part too, because they have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that a crime occurred. All 12 jurors have to say guilty in order for them to win, which is a hard burden of proof when we know that most sex crimes happen behind closed doors, where there's only two people there. There's not a video camera. There's not, witnesses. And so it makes it a hard crime to prove. That, coupled with the fact that most survivors, I mean, we know that 50% of survivors don't come forward. It's scary to come forward. And even scarier to think, if I come forward and I talk to the police, you think that then the police are going to help you and file a case and you're going to get justice. But if you knew that you had a 2 to 5% chance of actually having what happened in the courtroom this morning, would you still want to try? So that's where civil justice really comes into play,
Mm.
because we have a lower burden of proof, more likely than not. 50 and a feather. You believe this person over this person, you win. I mean, I've actually taken a case to trial where we had literally 0%. I mean, not we didn't have any evidence that we sent back with the jury to the deliberation room, because there weren't text messages, we didn't have photos. But I believed my client. I knew she was telling the truth. And I just had faith that if we stuck him on the stand, he was going to show his true colors. And he did. He got upset at one point. He got really pissed off, and I'll never forget it. We were crossing him and said, you called her a slut. You called her a slut. And, he kept going, and he gets so upset. And he goes, I didn't call her a slut. I called her a whore. And we were like, whoa. And he got so upset. And the jury just kind of, it was like goosebump moment, because then the gig was up.
Yeah.
There was no way he could recover from that. So I believe that the truth comes out. We just have to find the best vehicle to help survivors get justice, so that that rate in which we're holding perpetrators accountable is way higher. I don't want it to be the 2 to 5%, you know, accountability rate. It should be 100% accountability rate. For you hurt somebody, you need to be held accountable for your actions.
Couldn't agree more, obviously, and we'll get to some of those systemic changes. But that's a great segue to the next question, which is, if you are a survivor and you want to take your case to law enforcement and you want to go through that process, what are some of the things you wish every survivor knew at the start?
Yeah, there's a couple things I'd want survivors to know. One, from what I just said, I don't want to scare people into not coming forward and talking to law enforcement. I do think there is a benefit. Once you list a perpetrator, their name goes into the system. So even if they don't prosecute your case, that their name is in the system, they can choose to do it later based on the statute of limitations. So then maybe you're a witness, or maybe they file charges later. There are strengths in numbers. So having them in the system and being part of CODIS, I think, is important. But a couple things I would say is, one, most people are trained to go to the hospital. You've been sexually assaulted, go to the hospital, and there the cops will show up, you'll get a SART exam. That's actually not the way it works. There are very specific SART centers, depending on where you're at in the state, as to where you can get a SART exam. So I think it's better and more comfortable and trauma informed if a survivor just makes the call from their home, call the police department, and stay home until it's your turn, and then they will escort you to the SART center, because oftentimes it takes hours. It's not immediate, which is hard. So which leads me to the second point. While you're in that time frame, the biggest response that survivors want to do is, something bad just happened to me, I want to wash it away. I feel dirty, I don't like the way, I want to get in the shower, I want to cry, I want to just wash away the memory. But if you're going to bring a case, potentially, you're destroying evidence, not on purpose. It's completely just on accident. But so stop the urge. Try and stop the urge to take a shower. Try not to pee. I know that's hard too, because if you were drugged and they have to get, a urine sample or blood sample, try not to eat, brush your teeth, all of those natural things. Take a change of clothing with you, because if there is any evidence on your underwear or undergarments, they're going to take your clothing from you. They do have clothing that they hand out when you're there, but they're not the most fashionable or comfy. They try to do their best to give you things, but just be prepared and know that you're entitled to an advocate. You get to have a support person with you. You do not have to do it alone. And that's a really scary thing, is thinking you're alone. And will anybody believe me? Will anybody be here for me? 100%. There's a whole community, as you saw in the courtroom this morning. There is a whole community that wants you to know you are not alone, and people do believe you. Oh, the last thing I would say that I think is really important in understanding the neurobiology of trauma is that when a survivor is sexually assaulted, you go into fight or flight mode. Your brain automatically stops recording memories the way you would normally record memories, and it goes into like trauma response. Well, when you're in trauma response, you cannot remember usually things in a linear fashion. And cops always want to say, all right, start from the beginning and tell me what happened. You did this day, then you did that, and then what happened? Well, when a survivor can't answer those questions, they go, oh, they must be lying. There's gaps in pieces. How do you not remember what happened? But we know that not only is drugs or alcohol usually involved in an assault that complicates the memory issue further, but that whole memory thing's happening. So it doesn't mean you're lying. It means you're normal. It means that your brain worked just as it was supposed to. When you were in danger, it tried to protect you. So I always say, with survivors, one, tell the truth. Always tell the truth. Even the scary stuff that you don't want to admit, like, oh, I did a line of cocaine earlier, or, because you start out behind the 8 ball. And if you get caught lying once, there goes your credibility, like, out the window. So tell the truth, admit the yucky stuff. Believe me, everyone's heard it all. And it doesn't mean that it's your fault because you decided to, go back to somebody's house or whatever it is, because every instance requires affirmative consent. but then tell the story the way that makes sense to you. We find that tactile things, sensory memories, so the way something smelled, um, touched, uh, things like that, those are actually experiences that are still recorded in your brain at the time of trauma. So when I'm interviewing a survivor, I usually, if they're having a hard time kind of recalling things, I always say, what's the thing you can't forget?
Mm.
What's the one part? And usually, oh, it was this song. I remember this song. I hate this song. It haunts my memories now. Okay, tell me about the song. And usually from that anchor, it goes back and there the memory will come. So
Mm.
don't let the police bully you into making you tell the story in the way they want you to tell it. Tell it in a way that speaks your truth. Like, this is your truth. This is your story. Tell it.
Mm.
So,
So along those lines, you just busted a number of rape myths. What are some other things you wish people knew about survivors, knew about sexual violence?
well, the biggest thing is, right, the rapist, oh, God, these people are always crying wolf, or they're lying. Survivors are liars. They're just saying this because they're going through a custody battle and they hate their ex-husband, which is a hard one, right? That spouses can't rape their spouse, which we know that's not true. You can rape your spouse. Or they're making it up. But the rate of false reporting is so low. The statistics, like just like the rate of prostitution, unfortunately, depending on what you're talking about, it's like below 5%. And when it's talking about children, the rate of children making up that they have been molested is even lower. So if a child says that they've been sexually abused, believe them. Believe them. And yes, children are also known to recant. Because what happens is, let's say it's stepdad who's molested the child, and then mom is crying and they see mom crying and mom's like, we're gonna be out on the street. Are you sure this happened? We're gonna lose everything. Mommy now has to get divorced and da 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 da. And then kiddo thinks, this is my fault. Look at how I'm hurting mommy. So I'm going to recant and say it didn't happen. That's so common. And people think, oh, see, that means no, the kid wasn't lying. The kid was being authentic when they told you the first time. So I think that's one really big rape myth that people need to realize, is that most survivors are telling the truth. The second one is that your perpetrator, you usually know them. 80% of survivors know their perpetrator. It's a family member, it's a coworker, your boss, it's someone in college. Right now we're in the red zone. I don't know if you've heard that term, but we're in the red zone right now, which means this is the highest rate for college students who've just gone back from now until Thanksgiving. This is when most sexual assault happens. Why? Because people get to college, they're drinking, they're inexperienced. There's all kinds of different reasons, but it's your colleagues that are going to potentially hurt you. It's rare that it's a stranger, right? In the bushes, or we've heard, ride shares. Those have been an issue, but that's what also makes it hard. It complicates it for a survivor to come forward, because they're like, wait, I thought they were my friend. We trusted them. So that those two things I think people need to know. And that alcohol, drugs and alcohol, we talked about that earlier too, very commonly used. And just because someone drank alcohol or ingested any kind of drug does not mean they consent. It does not equal consent. And I speak to college kids and go out and talk to them about consent. And one of the kind of rules of thumb I use is that if you're too drunk to drive, you're too drunk to consent. You don't have the mental capacity. So like, put a pin in it, put it on ice. It can wait till tomorrow. It's not that serious. Like, I know everybody's having the moment, having fun, but just like, calm down, because the trauma that comes from being sexually assaulted is way worse.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. So busting rape myths, so along those lines, from your unique position, having been through trials and settlements and negotiations. What have you witnessed in the courtroom? I always say, you know, that rape trials are relatively unique, in that it's a character assassination of, they're not going to put the rapist on the stand. They're not going to be, he mostly is not going to be talking about his actions or defending himself. He'll just never get on the stand. It's a character assassination of the survivors who come forward. So it's a unique sort of trial. Can you speak about what you've witnessed and what survivors go through in the courtroom?
So, I mean, I think you highlighted some of the scariest thing, right? That's what every survivor is afraid of. They're going to put me on the stand and I'm going to get raked over the coals, and this is going to be super traumatizing. You know, when it gets to that point, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It is traumatizing to have to do that. But I want to explain a couple things. First, though, is that not in the civil world, 99% of cases don't go to trial. So the odds of a survivor actually having to take the stand and testify in a civil trial are very small. And if it goes to a criminal trial, you know, there is a preliminary hearing, but judges will give a perpetrator a better deal if they don't make a survivor take the stand. So there is incentive for them to prevent a survivor from having to go through that trauma. And if a survivor does have to take the stand, there is support out there. So I think it's really important for a survivor to realize that they are not going to be alone in the courtroom. They can get, I love the therapy dogs. The courts, most of them have the programs where you can have a therapy dog with you up on the stand that you can pet. You can go to the courtroom before, ahead of time, kind of check it out, try it, you know, feel it on for sides to help like calm your nerves. There are advocates out there who will be there with you. You know, if it's my office, we have our advocates and we give fidget spinners and, you know, practice and kind of talk them through it. So it's not as scary of a situation as it can be. But in civil, the thing I love about civil is where in criminal, the perpetrator doesn't have to take the stand. In civil, oh, I can call him. I can call him and force him to get up there. And it gets to be equally, if not more painful, when I get my hands on them and get to cross them and do all the uncomfortable questioning that survivors have had to go through. And we do that most commonly in the deposition process. But we do the whole thing. So where a survivor, that sometimes is, it feels good for my clients to know that they're having to answer and get put in the hot seat. We've got a case that's coming up that the assault happened in the perpetrator's home. We've noticed a site inspection for his home. We plan to go into his house. We're going to take pictures, look at all his stuff. He's so upset about it, but I could give two craps about how he feels about it. It's part of the justice system. It's part of the discovery of evidence. And, you know, we get to subpoena their work records and their social media and all of the things that they have potentially to hide, because we know that perpetrators usually aren't one-hit wonders. So there's bodies buried everywhere that they're worried about. So it's really nice to be able to turn the tables on them. And it's good to feel those wheels of justice turning. But for any survivor that is going to have to testify and take the stand, I'd really say it's important to, you know, answer only the question that's being asked, and self-care, self-care, self-care. The fact that a survivor got to that place really shows also how strong they are and the courage it took to get to that point. So I think if you have the support, you kind of know you've got it. You've got it. You're not alone. Like, you can do this, and take care of yourself as you're doing it. You know, whether it's meditating, going for a run. I mean, there's all kinds of things. We work on all kinds of things with our clients to help ground them and to give them the support that they need. But just realize that, you know, you got to take it one day at a time, 1 minute at a time. But you've got this. You 100% got this.
Well, speaking of therapy dogs, we have therapy kittens.
I love that.
Areas. So this is This is Baldwin, and you saw stuff
Hi, Baldwin.
little therapy kittens to help some of us through this really hard material. But let's stay on that theme of trauma. You are opening a center that addresses this directly. Talk to us about that. So it's coming full circle for you.
Yeah, I'm always trying to figure out a way to hold space for survivors so that they can heal. And one of the ways is through the justice system, through civil litigation. But I just saw a gap in the market and what was kind of out there. And I was sending my clients to, you know, therapists, and it's really hard. I'm sure, as you know, it's hard to find good therapists who are trauma informed and who take certain insurance or don't take insurance, and then they're expensive. And it's like, you've got all these survivors in trauma who can't find a good place who understands sexual assault trauma. So, I mean, even if you do, right, you find this therapist and you're like, well, what kind of therapy do I need? Do I need regular like talk therapy? Wait, there's this thing people are talking about called EMDR. Where do I get that? Okay, I need EMDR. I got to go to a different therapist because this one doesn't do it. Then, we know that the studies show that wellness activities are really great for helping to, neuroplasticity, changing your neuro response to trauma. So, where do I go get Qigong or sound healing, meditation? And so now you're talking about going to all these places. And they're not also specifically trauma informed for sexual assault survivors. So my business partner and I, who was CEO of our Rape Crisis Center at the time, and who has had decades of experience in this space, we dreamed up this beautiful vision that is now a Sorona Healing Center. It'll be a healing center with an outpatient treatment facility. So you can go in just for the day. We'll have inpatient. You can stay for a week, a month. And we're going to have everything, all kinds of everything with trauma focused for sexual assault survivor healing. Everything from EMDR to wellness activities to group therapies to, dietary. Because we notice that trauma manifests in different ways for everybody, right? So some people, they cut, some people have depression, some people have alcohol or eating disorders. And what I've noticed too with most treaters is they just they just plug up the hole, right? They're like, oh, here, let me help you stop cutting, or let me help your alcohol addiction. But if you don't address the root cause of why your trauma is manifesting that way, how do you get better?
Addressing the symptoms instead of the cause. Yep.
Exactly. So that's kind of our ethos and what we're our guiding star of how we came to it and what the services we're going to provide. But I'm super excited because we've been so blessed to have such amazing healers that have reached out, and everybody who wants to work on this project. I really feel like it's a community project. And the cool thing, I feel very blessed and feels like a full circle moment for me is I've taken the money that we've earned from helping survivors for the last couple of years that we got out of getting Triumph out of trauma. And we are now using that money to fund the center that is now going to bring peace to other survivors. So that part gives me chills and makes me want to cry because it's so right. It's exactly where that money needed to go. And I think it also makes my clients feel happy to know that their trauma has 100% now helped somebody else.
That's amazing. There it is. There's the survivor work.
Right?
To the community, the club no one wants to be in, but wow, what a great community, a great network of survivors, siblings. Along those lines, talk to us about the network, right? Talk to us about your work, your activism. So you've worked with rape crisis centers, obviously the legal system, you're creating a healing space. Talk to us about the survivor network and why that's so important for survivors to heal and find justice.
Well, there's so many ways for a survivor to heal, and I really feel like not one shoe fits all. And just because civil is one way, or criminal is one way, or volunteerism, or activism in helping to pass legislation, or speak your truth on Capitol Hill so that it helps support bills, it's different for everybody, right? And you have to do what's best for you. And I support that. I think survivors need to be able to make choices. That's key in the healing process, because sexual assault is about power. It's about someone taking your power from you. You didn't get a choice. Nobody signs up to be like, hey, I want to be part of this club, or I want to be sexually assaulted. Like, nobody picked that choice. But you get to pick what happens next. You get to pick where you stand. And sometimes that's just in the bed, underneath the covers, crying, doing nothing. Maybe that's your truth and what you need at that moment.
Mm.
But knowing there are other options out there, knowing that you can try civil, you can try criminal, you can do like the amazing work you're doing right now, by educating people about what's out there and letting people know that they're not alone.
Mm.
That's the magic, right? That's
Mm.
where the sweet stuff happens so that people can heal.
Amen. There it is. Let's jump into some questions. Your interview has inspired a number of questions that are really great. An anonymous attendee asks, have you ever been shocked by comments made by judges or other legal professionals during rape trials?
Yes. Unfortunately, yes. You have to remember judges and lawyers and they're all human. And they have preconceived biases, and there's misinformation, and sometimes there's some bad law that judges have no choice but to make some bad rulings. Sometimes there's bad judges. I had to argue, probably the most heinous thing I've ever heard or had to argue was we had a case where a woman had been sodomized, and the defense brought a motion because in her deposition, they wanted to ask about how many times she had had anal sex before. And I said, absolutely not. And so we go down to court, we argued it, and the defense lawyer argued that if this were a car crash and the victim had said they hurt their back, they'd be entitled to know what the status was of their back before they got into the car crash. They had a baseline to know what kind of injury. So the argument was, if she'd had prior anal sex, then it wasn't as traumatizing to have been sodomized that time because she was used to having things in her butt. And I was like, I'm sorry, what? Like, so we argue this. And I mean, it was an hour and a half argument. And the judge just kind of like, maybe like we would need to know, like, if she had anal penetration before. And it was like, what are you talking about, Your Honor? Like, are you out of your mind? Like, why would you say this? Why would you even rule like that? That was a hard day because in civil court, there is no law that says, like in criminal court, there's Marcy's law that precludes a survivor from them asking a survivor about prior sexual experiences. And in civil court, if we claim as part of the damages, we claim that they have intimacy issues, potentially, depending on how the judge is going to rule, the gate is open to asking current partners or potentially past partners about, does the survivor have intimacy issues? I always fight against it. I'm not a big fan, and most judges get it right, but that judge did not get it right. They said that the survivor, while she didn't have to testify about it herself in her depositions, she had to give the names of every person she had slept with in the 5 years before and currently, and that they could depose them to ask them about her intimacy issues. That was a really shitty ruling. And the survivor honestly then folded after because she's said, I can't do that. And I get it. I mean, it breaks my heart. I get it. It's amazing the stuff you see, but it also is a point for education, so that we can change that. And that's why it's also important. Who do we put on the bench? Really vetting and making sure we have good judges who get it and who make good law. It's also really important that we, as lawyers, when we get assigned to a judge, you decide whether or not you can actually do a peremptory challenge and strike them. So if you've got a bad judge is biased against survivors, I mean, that is not the person I'm going to have on my case.
Yeah.
So, move them out. there's legal strategy that goes into all of it, but unfortunate. We're getting better. I would say things in the world are getting better since the Me Too movement because more people are talking about it, but I still see things. And I've got a case in Idaho right now, and it's amazing when you go to different places around the country, their stance on sexual violence, they're a little bit behind. They're still, I'd say, 20 years behind where we were. Imagine going back 20 years, how we feel about sexual violence here in California. Blessed to live in such a progressive state, but you got to remember who your audience is. Mm-hmm. And when we're out there arguing a case, always remember who your audience is and speak to them. Doesn't mean we can't educate them, but just know where the starting point is.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're certainly seeing, the country kind of sorting into states with more forward progressive laws in terms of abortion and rape. And this has been happening for a long time. We're seeing it very obviously with abortion, but different experiences for survivors and women and other marginalized groups in different states. You brought up the Me Too movement. Great segue to another question. The anonymous attendee asks, since the Me Too movement and some of these more high profile convictions, are defense attorneys getting savvier about protecting accused assailants? Are there new ways we should be protecting ourselves from not being believed in court?
Yes. When I've been doing this 17 years, and before the Me Too movement, there wasn't a sexual assault kind of defense lawyer. That wasn't like, they were just like car crash defense lawyers, right? Or a generic type of lawyer. And so I felt like when I would go up against them, they were always kind of flustered, or they didn't know exactly, they were learning, figuring it out. And so I felt like it was far and few between that I actually came across a really savvy defense lawyer who only did this kind of stuff. You'd see it for like child molestation school cases, but with women, adult survivor cases, not so much. Now there are firms that dedicate themselves to just defending this type of case, which then means it's not their first rodeo. So they're much savvier in their tactics, how they're defending it. And I don't want to say the things that I think they do well, because I don't want them to keep doing those things and I don't want to give them kudos. But they've gotten better. They've gotten better. And so it's important that I think you have a good team. You have a good team behind you that knows what they're doing, that understands how to best frame the case, how to help you put your best foot forward when presenting the case. Because we're telling a story, your story. It's a real story. But even when we tell real stories, we have to think about who is our audience. How is it going to be received? What is the best way to get the result we want? So it takes strategy, I think. I think the truth always comes out and the truth will set you free, but it's not as easy as I think just like throw it up there and it's going to work. So, I'm always happy to talk to anybody if they have specific questions about like, hey, this is, because it's hard, right? For different cases, you do different things. But I'm always happy to help a survivor, always talk to anybody for free just to help them, because I really believe in paying it forward.
That's wonderful that you do that work. I know you're super busy and the life of is
you know what, you want something done, give it to the busy person. That's
right. Give it to a busy woman. Well, and speaking of defense strategies, because this next question is a defense strategy that we know for sure is being used in these high profile cases. This anonymous attendee asks, have you noticed or known about paid coordinated smear campaigns that the defense team utilizes to sway public opinion? It certainly felt like Amber Heard was up against a massive coordinated effort to discredit her on social media while her case was broadcast publicly. And just a quick note, for sure, we know they're hiring PR firms. We know that Marilyn Manson's, hiring there. We know that folks in his circle, folks in Johnny Depp's circle. This is a new strategy where they're trying to win the court of public opinion while a case is going on.
Unfortunately, it's part of the game. It's part of the strategy. And so if you're going to get involved in that game, you also need to have a PR campaign where, get ahead of it. What is it we want the public to know about this case? How do we set the stage and make sure that the truth is coming out and it's not being skewed? So, I mean, those are things I think about, like if we're going to run involved in media, I think about what's the theme of the case early and what are the facts that are most important. It's important to, I mean, we focus group things too, where, we have a sample jury in the whatever area it is that the case would be heard, and bring in an expert, pull some people, see how they feel about it. How do you feel about this? What facts are most important to you? What are potential damaging things that could hurt this? Okay, well then, we hear what people are thinking. Okay, that'll help us, and as we figure out a plan, it's important to go out there, and it's important that when you have something to say, you say something that matters. I don't think it's good just to get up and give a statement or say something just to say it. I think it should be calculated, because I think that's what they're doing. So really thinking about what is the message that you want to say. I mean, I'm sure just as you with this campaign and how you decided, what are you putting on your website? I mean, who are we going to interview? It's very intentional. And so be intentional with your message. That would be my best advice. And take your advice from your lawyer, and don't put it up on social media. Don't do all those things, because you need to think about what you're doing. And you need to remember too, I like to tell the story from, let's talk about this perpetrator. Like, everybody wants to put the focus on, did you hear Jane got raped? Well, then, because the minute you frame it that way, then they say, well, what was Jane wearing? Why was Jane there? Oh, Jane should have been home. And then all of a sudden they start hypothesizing about what a terrible human Jane is. But if we change the narrative and we say, did you hear that John raped Jane? Did you know that John had hurt 3 other girls before he hurt Jane? Then all of a sudden people go, well, God, John's a terrible human. And why did John do that? And John shouldn't have been at that party, because if he knew, and maybe John, whatever, and not to say that all perpetrators are male, and I'm just using John and Jane as just generic things, because we know that perpetrators can be anyone. So I want to bring light to that. I wasn't just saying that, but frame it, change the narrative, and set the stage, so that when they bring whatever bullshit they're going to bring, it doesn't matter. Then they look stupid. That's what I tell my clients too. When he beats you up, or the defense lawyer beats you up on the stand or in deposition, be kind, be you. Don't get in the mud with them. Don't get upset and start yelling and this and that, because that's what they want to do. They want to get a rise out of you. But if a jury sees them beating up a kind human who's up there crying, you don't kick somebody when they're down. The jury then automatically wants to hug you and help you. And then they think, what a terrible villain they are. They suck. Look, not only is that a shitty perpetrator, but they hired a lawyer who's equally as shitty. So we want defense lawyers to act that way. We want them, go ahead, try and throw her through the mud. But here's another thing that most people don't realize too, is you actually don't have to go through the mud publicly. Unless you want your case to be public, you are entitled to anonymity in California. The law protects you. So you can bring a case as your initials, as a John Doe, Jane Doe, whatever it is that you want to use your name, so you can heal in private. It doesn't have to be that way. So most lawyers who don't practice sexual assault litigation don't realize that. And so it always frustrates me when I get brought in on a case after the fact and there's my client's name. Well, sure enough, if you put the name out there, then people are going to go social media, do the whole campaign and try and dig dirt. But when you don't do that, then it's contained to the litigation. And only the lawyers or the insurance adjusters are digging into the client in private. So then no one else gets to see that. And we can usually then protect against that. So before, we start a lawsuit and stuff, make your social media private, like narrow your friends. Be careful what you're doing. There's ways to protect yourself. So I think it just needs to be, you gotta be smart. You gotta be smart about it.
Mm-hmm. Well, and speaking of that, and talking about speaking out, Rhonda has a question about defamation. Of course, E. Jean Carroll, her second defamation case now just decided that it's just a matter of how much money, because once again, Donald Trump saying that he didn't sexually violate her has been found to be defamatory. So Rhonda asks, have you had prior experience with survivors being sued for speaking out with added defamation torts with a silence contract involved?
Yes, and I got sued too. But we won. So in California, we filed suit, and there was a police report as well. The defendant then filed a defamation action and malicious prosecution. In California, we have anti-SLAPP laws, and anti-SLAPP laws says when you speak your truth and you put it in a police report or in a complaint, that's protected speech. So a perpetrator can't then turn around and sue you for it. So not only will they lose and that case got dismissed, then they got fined. So that perpetrator actually to this day owes me a bunch of money. I don't think he'll ever pay it, but that wasn't the point. The point was to say, you don't get to pick on my clients. I just did that case actually against a politician, Stringer, in New York, for a woman who came forward and, he came forward and said, this guy hurt me in the Cuomo race. It was for the governor race in New York. And then came forward, and it wasn't against Cuomo, I should say that. But came forward and he turned around and sued her for defamation.
Right.
And the judges issued a ruling a couple months ago and said, no, sorry, sir. Not happening. So there are protections out there for survivors. If it's in a settlement agreement, there are interesting things to think about. So you can contract, well, I should say as a blanket rule now, secret settlements about the facts about what happened, they cannot silence you from telling you your story. You are entitled to tell your story and speak your truth. What they can contract for and pay you to do is one, for non-disparagement, and then for confidentiality as to the amount that you were paid. So then you would have to say, it was amicably resolved, or I can't tell you about how much I was paid, things like that. But if it's for non-disparagement, that makes it interesting, because then you can't say anything that gives them in a bad light. So you're like, well, how do I tell my truth without making the perpetrator look bad? So usually what ends up happening is it's like you can tell your story generally, you just can't say like specifically who did it. It makes it dicey. Because what we know generally is that the truth is a defense to a defamation cause of action.
Right.
So if you can show that you were speaking the truth, they can't sue you for defamation. You should win. So you got to be careful. I always tell my clients, don't make personal opinion, like don't say that guy's the worst guy in the world, or that human's, is terrible, they raped me, this or this or that. Get rid of the inflammatory language and just tell the facts. Just speak the facts. Let the audience or whoever you're talking to decide that they don't like them. You don't say that. That's a good way to kind of walk the fine line of protecting yourself in a situation like that.
Okay, great advice. We have other folks seeking advice on how legal and medical professionals can collect the evidence they need to prosecute a crime without re-traumatizing the survivor.
Well, that's a big thing, right? SART centers, where they actually do a forensic medical examination to collect evidence, those people only do those things. And so they tend to be very trauma informed. They do that process every day, all day. And so as much as that's a very intrusive and kind of embarrassing, it's not a fun thing. I've heard good feedback that the SANE nurses do a lovely job, and they try to be as kind and trauma informed as possible. Law enforcement, we always hope that they're going to be that way, but we know that there are great ones, and then there are ones who have no trauma training and traumatize my clients. I had a cop a couple weeks ago that tried to not have to file the report and called my client and gave her misinformation and told her one was very mean, told her that no one would ever believe her. There was no surveillance camera and that she was likely going to lose. First of all, cops can't make those decisions. Only the district attorney or the U.S. Attorney's Office or whoever the prosecutor is, they're the only ones who get to decide if a case is going forward or not. Not the cops. The cops don't get to do that. They don't have that training. They do the investigations that then turns it over, and then the DA makes a decision on whether or not they're going to prosecute. So then tells my client that it's going to cost her $1,000 a day to prosecute this case for $1,000 every hearing in order if she wants to go forward. So she should just drop it.
Hmm.
Well, what do we know about perpetrators? They pick vulnerable people in low socioeconomic, populations, or they always want vulnerable people. She didn't have $1,000. I mean, who has $1,000 a day to pay for a prosecution? Well, first of all, it's a bunch of bullshit because you do not have to pay for a criminal prosecution. That's funded by the government. So that was misinformation and a way to silence that survivor. We jumped in and we have fixed that issue. But it just shows that training, and more training and education needs to happen. We also really need to support funding to the sex crimes division of the police department, because oftentimes there's so much turnover in sex crimes because it's a stepping stone to get to being a homicide detective. Because homicide detectives, at least like in San Diego, they get their own car, they get better benefits. So people would rather be in homicide than be in sex crimes. Well, we want to incentivize cops and detectives to stay in sex crimes and to get the same stuff. So we know that we're getting a really high level of investigation, and so that their interaction results in higher convictions, because if they do a better job investigating, then we'll get then the DA has a better shot at getting a prosecution and filing these cases. So it's hard. You've got to find those lovely unicorns who love this work and whose passion is in it, and then give them the resources and tools they need to do their job so that we can hold more perpetrators accountable. Absolutely.
So great, as a systemic reform that's necessary. You brought up the issue of the cost, and an attendee has a question about that. What advice do you have for a survivor who would like to go through the civil legal process, but the defendant doesn't come from money?
That's hard too, right? So that's a conundrum. I mean, that part breaks my heart, because for every 10 calls I get in my office, maybe we take one case, because my job as a civil attorney, and when I'm wearing that hat, is my job is to get a survivor money for pain and suffering, medical bills, lost wages, all of those things. That's my job. That's the only way that a harm is compensated in civil court, is with money. If a perpetrator doesn't have money, I can't get blood from a turnip. But that's why we often look at, is someone else responsible? Because it's not just the perpetrator, it's the enablers. Who allowed this to happen? If it's at a school where there are other teachers that saw, was a school district, did they not have good training, policies and procedures? If this is a rideshare company, they're doing so much better now with all the safety mechanisms. But whatever organization it is, oftentimes we can find there are some other entities or corporations or companies or people that are also responsible. So that's also another way to look at helping get a survivor money. That's what I kind of love about the civil justice, and we get to be really creative, and it's like a Rubik's Cube, right? We're turning it around and we're looking at it, and we're maybe on its face, you think, oh, let's just get this simple sexual battery cause of action. We're like, but how could we manipulate this to get creative so we can get a survivor justice? Because at the end of the day, I'm just trying to get the money to help them heal, to get to a place where they can turn this lemon into lemonade, and to do something good for them. So they have the resources to heal or take that time off, so they can, be at peace or move out of this environment because their perpetrator lives down the street, or whatever it is. So it's hard. I wish we could help everybody. One of my dreams down the road is I would love to have a nonprofit that just funds a legal clinic that takes all these cases. And says, just so survivors would know, it wasn't your fault. Here's a piece of paper for a judgment for $100,000. You may never collect on it any day in your life, but at least someone out there believed you.
Well, and similar question. How much do you have to pay for a civil trial? And I assume you're going to say, well, we only take the ones where we, we'll get a cut on the other end.
Well, so all civil lawyers, and if any lawyer tells you otherwise, I'd really question them. But we work on a contingency basis, which means you only pay if you win. We take a percentage at the end. So the lawyers are incentivized to win too, because they don't get paid, you don't get paid, nobody gets paid unless we win the case. So what's great about that, though, is that a survivor doesn't come out of pocket anything. And the lawyers will front the costs for the litigation, the filing fees and experts and all of that stuff. And it just comes out at the end. So there's an accounting and, everybody agrees on it and you make sure everything's fair. But that's the beautiful part. And consultations with lawyers should all, for personal injury lawyers, especially sexual assault lawyers, should all be free. So it doesn't cost a survivor anything to talk to a lawyer and figure out and get advice. And then it doesn't cost them anything again until the end. And if they don't win, I think that's the biggest thing I should say. If you don't win, and God forbid, you may knock on wood, I don't like to lose and I don't lose. But you paid nothing. That's actually the lawyer's expense. Like if they lose, that's their gamble and they're out the money. They will then, eat up the cost of whatever they've spent on litigating it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, one last question. Is there a database of perpetrators that isn't official, something that has information about rapists where survivors can enter info? Is there a database of rapists that have been convicted that is available online?
Yeah, I mean, okay, so there's CODIS, which is the government's version. Then there's a bunch of different companies out there right now that are trying to track that. I think it was like Jane Doe is one of them. There's different ones that are across campuses. I can't remember all the names of them. I support what they're trying to do and I understand. And I wish there was like a national just mainframe that everyone had access to and could plug into. But right now it's like you have all these competing companies and no one's communicating with each other. So then like it's stressful for a survivor to have to report. So you're gonna have to jump on all these different platforms and tell everybody and hopefully you get a hit. But because of confidentiality and the way the information goes in, it doesn't necessarily then kick out a message to you and say, okay, you have a hit and these are the other people, because it's not a perfect system. They're trying to work on it. I haven't seen anything, honestly, unfortunately, that I think works. We know that the police departments aren't even all communicating,
That's
which
right.
is psycho, especially in places where there's so many different counties. We have counties within the same state that are not communicating to catch predators. And I think everyone saw that. If you've seen that documentary, Unbelievable, I mean, that highlights it. Like, if only all of the police's internal mainframe communicated and said, oh my God, we've got a perpetrator with the same MO doing all these things, who's just moving from county to county or state to state. Here in California, they cross over into Nevada, into Arizona, and then they just do this ring around. So it's a problem. I think it's a problem. I think we have to do better. But we're just not there yet.
Yeah, absolutely. That database would be so invaluable for everyone. I mean, there's Voices in Action, which will match you up in Hollywood. There's Callisto that'll match you up on college.
That's what I was saying. Yep.
But you have to put the name in and that's the match. So there's no searchable database. We will wrap
and
up
I love
there.
Callisto. I should say I really like the people who started Callisto as well. I should have, God forgive me for not remembering them. Thank you for saying them. I think they're doing good work. It's just, it's not perfect.
And Voices in Action, Jessica Barth. I mean, it's great for if you're in those spaces. I wish we had databases. Just a searchable database would be awesome. I remember don'tdatehimgirl.com did a little bit of that and then they got sued and shut down. And so there are obviously issues in terms of privacy, but certainly we could get a database of convicted offenders of sexual violence, and hopefully someone will work on this. So we'll put that out into the universe because it would be a really useful, important tool. And on that note, Jessica Pride, you are my hero. You are just amazing in this space. You're helping so many survivors, and the advice that you offered today is invaluable. I know a lot of folks will be sharing this video with folks who are thinking about going through the process or have gone through it. So thank you for your work and your time today. We truly appreciate you.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate you.
Thank you. And please practice some self-care now, folks who've watched this.
Yes.
All of them says practice self-care, and she's here to ease whatever pain you might have just a little bit. And I hope you all have a wonderful afternoon.